fluorescent hum of the 10th floor office at Pinnacle Solutions in Charlotte, North Carolina, was as familiar to Ethan Caldwell as his own heartbeat. At 57, he was the linchpin of the IT department, a senior systems architect who'd weathered 19 years of tech revolutions, dial-up modems to AI-driven cloud systems, while training every coder who passed through. His desk, tucked in a corner by a window overlooking the city's skyline, held a chipped coffee mug from his daughter's art class, a framed photo of his wife, Laura, and a stubborn aloe plant that thrived despite the sterile light. On a crisp Monday morning in October, Ethan was summoned to his boss's office. The air felt off, like the static before a storm. When he saw Megan from HR already seated, her tablet glowing with the termination form, he knew. "Ethan, we're eliminating your position," said Ryan Mitchell, his manager of 4 years, a 38-year-old with a penchant for buzzwords like disruption and agile. Ryan's eyes flicked to the desk, avoiding Ethan's. "It's a strategic shift. Clean out your desk by end of day." Ethan nodded once, his face unreadable. "Understood," he said, his voice steady, betraying none of the weight crashing through him. He walked out, past the glass-walled office, feeling the eyes of younger coders, kids he'd mentored, darting his way before dropping to their screens. No one spoke. News spread like wildfire in open-plan offices. Ethan returned to his desk, methodically packing. The mug, the photo, the aloe. A post-it note from Laura, "Don't forget dinner at 7, went into his pocket. Sarah from accounting paused by his cube, her voice low. "Ethan, this is insane. You are this place. They can't just—" "Companies pivot," Ethan cut in, his tone calm but final. "It's fine." It wasn't, but he wouldn't give them the satisfaction of a scene. Sarah hesitated, then retreated, her heels clicking on the tile. As Ethan packed, Ryan lingered by the break room, watching like a hawk to ensure he left without incident. What Ryan didn't know, what none of them knew, was that Ethan wasn't just another tech grunt. He was the keeper of Pinnacle's digital soul. Every server, every line of custom code, every workaround for crises the C-suite never noticed, bore his fingerprints. He'd written the security protocols, buried admin credentials 3 layers deep, and set up audit trails during a 2015 data breach scare, all approved by legal. And he had backups. Off-site, encrypted, untouchable. In the parking garage, Ethan sat in his '04 Tacoma, the engine idling. The Pinnacle Tower loomed, its glass facade reflecting the Charlotte sun. His security badge, renewed 18 times, lay on the passenger seat, a relic of loyalty. He drove home, the city blurring past, already planning. They'd rue Wednesday. Ethan had joined Pinnacle when it was a scrappy startup in a strip mall, back when his son Connor was still in diapers. Now Connor was a med student in Raleigh. Ethan had turned down headhunters from IBM and Cisco, choosing stability over flash. Laura used to tease him about his server family, and she wasn't far off. He knew every glitch, every patch, every shadow in the system's architecture. Pinnacle had grown through 4 acquisitions, each one leaning on Ethan's ability to stitch old systems to new. He'd saved them from crashes, audits, even a ransomware attack in 19, all without fanfare. Ryan became his boss 4 years ago, a Wharton grad who called IT human capital and spouted future-proofing in every meeting. Ethan tried to school him on the legacy systems, cobwebs of code from the 90s that still ran payroll, but Ryan's eyes glazed over. "We're going cloud-netic," he'd say, as if Ethan's work was quaint. 6 months ago, Ryan hired a consultant, Nathan Brooks, a 30-something with a Harvard MBA and a slick pitch deck. Nathan and Ryan huddled in conference rooms, their voices dropping when Ethan passed. 3 months back, Ethan noticed his admin access shrinking. Subtle tweaks to permissions, nothing overt. He could have raised hell, but he didn't. He watched, documented, ran silent scans. Laura picked up on his tension one night, her hand pausing over her wine glass. "Work okay, hun?" "Just the usual," Ethan said, forcing a smile. But it wasn't. Emails about system upgrades stopped including him. Projects he'd led for a decade went to junior coders. Then, buried in a routine scan, he found it. Irregular payments to a vendor called Summit Dynamics, a company with no website, just a P.O. box in Delaware. The transfers, approved by CFO Greg Harper, started at $10,000, 0 cents, then climbed $1,900,000, 0 cents, over 20 months. Ethan cross-checked the business registry. Summit's owner, Michael Harper, Greg's cousin, a shell company, siphoning funds through inflated software licenses. Ethan didn't confront anyone. He copied the data, transaction logs, approval chains, registry filings, onto a secure drive, one of several he'd kept since the 2015 audit, when legal greenlit off-site backups for continuity. No one had followed up. Sloppy, but useful. The day he was fired, Ethan saw the final piece, a memo, accidentally CC'd to him, outlining an IT modernization led by Nathan. Ethan's role was erased, replaced by a digital transformation lead reporting to Ryan. They weren't just cutting him loose, they were burying him to hide their tracks. At home, Ethan sat in his study, the house quiet. Laura was at her book club, leaving him with his thoughts and a locked drawer. He pulled out a flash drive, its weight heavier than its size. Plugging it in, he opened the files, payment records, emails, audit logs. The Summit scheme was clear. Greg inflating invoices, funneling the excess to his cousin. But there was more. Digging deeper, Ethan found another vendor, Blue Ridge Consulting, tied to Greg's sister, Lisa Harper. Over 3 years, they diverted $4,500,000, 0 cents, hidden in plain sight as maintenance fees. Ryan wasn't just complicit, he'd greenlit budget hikes to cover the losses, knowing the books were cooked. Ethan leaned back, a cold clarity settling in. For 19 years, he'd been the invisible fix-it man, the guy who kept the lights on while execs took bows. They'd tossed him aside, thinking he'd fade quietly. They didn't know he'd been watching, cataloging, preparing. His loyalty wasn't blind, it was meticulous. His phone buzzed. A text from Alex, a junior coder he'd trained. "Sorry, man, this is BS. Nathan's already in your office." Ethan didn't reply. He opened his laptop, accessing a dummy email account he'd set up years ago for penetration testing. Untraceable, but it looked internal. Wednesday was the quarterly board meeting, when Greg would present financials and Ryan would pitch his transformation. Perfect timing. Ethan drafted an email to Ryan, subject urgent financial anomalies. It outlined the Summit payments just enough to rattle him, no mention of the cousin. If Ryan was in on it, he'd squirm. If not, he'd dig. Either way, Ethan would see their next move. He scheduled it for 9 a.m. tomorrow, then closed the laptop. Outside, Charlotte's skyline twinkled, oblivious to the storm brewing. Ethan smiled, a rare edge to it. They thought they'd erased him. They were about to learn how much he'd left behind. Ethan Caldwell's Tacoma idled in the Charlotte dawn, the Pinnacle Solutions tower a silent monolith across the street. The sting of his Monday firing, 19 years of loyalty erased by Ryan Mitchell and HR's Megan, still burned. But Ethan wasn't broke. He'd packed his desk, left without a fuss, and carried with him the keys to Pinnacle's digital kingdom, encrypted backups, audit trails, and proof of a $4,500,000, 0 cents fraud tied to CFO Greg Harper's family. His email to Ryan, sent from an untraceable internal account at 9 a.m., was a spark in a powder keg. A vague warning about Summit Dynamics payments, no mention of Greg's cousin. Ethan watched the revolving doors, picturing Ryan's panic as the board meeting loomed. This wasn't revenge. It was justice. And Ethan was playing chess while they scrambled at checkers. By 9:30, his phone buzzed. Ryan's number. A voicemail clipped and urgent. "Ethan, we need to talk about your email. Call me now." Ethan let it sit, driving to a coffee shop in Noda, his laptop open under the hum of indie music. At 10:15, Megan emailed. "Mr. Caldwell, your communication violates company policy. Cease contact or face legal action." Ethan smirked. He hadn't signed their rushed severance agreement, and they knew it. Their threats were bluster, a sign they were rattled. Ethan's next move was precise. He pulled a second flash drive from his safe deposit box, this one holding older logs. Proof Greg had expanded his financial access 20 months ago, syncing with Summit's first payments. Blue Ridge Consulting, linked to Greg's sister, showed up too. It's $2,600,000, 0 cents in fees, a mirror of the scam. Ryan's emails buried in the archives confirmed he'd padded IT budgets to mask the losses, a willing pawn in Greg's game. The consultant, Nathan Brooks, was no innocent either. His hiring bypassed procurement, a cover to push Ethan out before he connected the dots. At noon, Ethan's phone rang again, this time Greg Harper himself, his voice smooth as polished oak. "Ethan, there's been a misunderstanding. Let's meet, clear this up. No need to bother the board with operational details." "Operational details?" Ethan said, his tone ice cold. "Like Summit Dynamics and your cousin Michael? Or Blue Ridge and your sister Lisa?" A sharp breath on the line. "You're out of your depth, Ethan. We can make this right." Generous severance, a glowing reference. "Goodbye, Greg," Ethan said, hanging up. Minutes later, Megan emailed again, offering double the severance if he signed a gag order. They thought he was shaking them down, a fired grunt looking for a payout. They had no idea what was coming. Ethan spent the night in his study, Laura asleep upstairs, the house cloaked in silence. He compiled a report, spreadsheets of Summit and Blue Ridge payments, email chains showing Ryan's complicity, business registries tying Greg's family to the shells, the total fraud, $4,800,000, 0 cents over 3 years, hidden in inflated invoices. He added Nathan's contract, flagged as a no-bid deal pushed by Greg. Every piece was airtight, cross-referenced, undeniable. But Ethan didn't send it to the board. Not yet. A direct email could be buried, dismissed as a disgruntled ex-employee's rant. He needed an ally. Robert Langston, a board member who'd worked with Ethan during the 19 ransomware crisis, was his pick. Robert was old school, a retired CPA who read every audit line, asked questions Ryan dodged. Ethan called him at 7 a.m. Tuesday. His voice calm but firm. "Robert, I need 15 minutes. It's about Pinnacle's finances." A pause. "Heard you got let go, Ethan." "This why Ryan and Greg are sweating at board meetings?" "Probably," Ethan said. "Can we meet?" An hour later, they sat on a park bench near Lake Norman, the autumn air crisp. Ethan handed Robert a sealed envelope, a printed summary, and a flash drive. Payments to fake vendors, tied to Greg Harper's family. Ryan's in on it. Nathan Brooks was hired to cover it up. It's all there. Dates, amounts, proof. Robert's eyes narrowed. "Why me?" "You don't let things slide," Ethan said. "I'm not after my job or money. I just want the truth out." Robert pocketed the envelope. "Emergency board meetings tomorrow, finance review. If this holds up, heads will roll." "They will," Ethan said, standing. As he walked away, his phone buzzed. A text from Laura. "Some guy named Nathan Brooks stopped by, said it's urgent. I told him you're out." Ethan's jaw tightened. They were desperate showing up at his home. He texted back, "I'm fine. Stay safe." That night, Ethan accessed Pinnacle's email server one last time, using credentials they'd failed to revoke. Sloppy, like everything else they'd done. He scheduled a message for 8 a.m. Wednesday, addressed to every board member. "Before you approve Q3 bonuses, read this." Attached was the full report, 47 pages of damning evidence. He logged out, shut his laptop, and slept soundly for the first time in weeks. Wednesday dawned bright, the board meeting set for 9 a.m. Ethan sat on his porch, coffee in hand, watching Charlotte wake. At 8:02, his phone lit up. Board assistants, unknown numbers, voicemails piling up. He ignored them. At 9:15, Alex, his former protege, texted, "Cops are here. Greg and Ryan in conference rooms. Nathan's pale as a ghost. What did you do?" Ethan didn't reply. The wheels were turning just as he'd planned. At 10:30, Pinnacle's general counsel, Karen Voss, called. Ethan answered, his voice even. "Mr. Caldwell, we need you in immediately to discuss your report." "Everything's in the file," Ethan said, "backed up in 5 secure locations. If anything happens to me or Laura, copies go to the SEC, IRS, and Charlotte Observer." A long silence. "The board's acting swiftly," Karen said, her tone tight. "Greg, Ryan, and Nathan are on leave pending investigation. We'd value your cooperation." "I've cooperated," Ethan said. "My part's done." He hung up, drove to a diner outside town, and waited. By noon, local business blogs were buzzing. Pinnacle execs probed for financial misconduct. No names yet, but the net was closing. At 2 p.m., Robert called, his voice grim. "It's a slaughter, Ethan. Greg cracked when we showed your evidence, tried to pin it on Ryan. Ryan's denying it all, says he's a victim. Nathan's claiming ignorance, but we found his firm got a $200 0-cent K bonus from Summit. Forensic accountants start Monday. Early estimates, $5 million, $300,000 0 cents stolen. The board wants you back, not your old job. They're talking chief security officer, reporting to us." Ethan exhaled, the weight of 19 years shifting. "I'll consider it," he said. That night he told Laura everything, the kitchen table strewn with takeout cartons. Her eyes widened at the numbers, then softened. "What do you want, Ethan?" He didn't know. The fury that fueled him after the firing had cooled, replaced by a quiet resolve. Justice was coming. Greg facing charges, Ryan cornered, Nathan running. But returning to Pinnacle meant walking back into a place that had discarded him. Could he? Friday morning, Ethan stood before the board, his suit crisp, his aloe plant on his new desk upstairs. Robert nodded as he entered, the interim CEO, a former COO named Diane, looking shaken. "Mr. Caldwell, your report exposed a $5,300,000 0 cents fraud. Criminal charges are imminent. We're offering you Chief Information Security Officer, executive level, full privileges." Ethan slid a folder across the table. "My terms: full audit authority, veto power on tech budgets, non-negotiable." Diane scanned it, her lips tight. "This is unprecedented." Saul was stealing $5,300,000 0 cents. Ethan said, "I'm the one to watch now." The room stilled. Robert broke the silence. "Did you plan this, Ethan?" "I didn't plan to be fired," Ethan said, his voice steady. "But I've always fixed what's broken. This was no different." At 11:59, Diane called. They'd agreed to every term. As Ethan hung up, Laura texted, "Proud of you. Dinner's on me." He smiled, the Charlotte skyline glowing outside. They'd underestimated him, thought him invisible. Now, they'd never forget his name. Ethan Caldwell's calculated strike had ignited a firestorm at Pinnacle Solutions. His meticulously crafted report, delivered to the board at the peak of their Wednesday meeting, exposed a $5,300,000 0 cents fraud, orchestrated by CFO Greg Harper, enabled by manager Ryan Mitchell, and obscured by consultant Nathan Brooks. The Charlotte boardroom had erupted. Greg's partial confession, Ryan's denials, Nathan's flight to nowhere Leeling. Ethan, the 57-year-old IP veteran they'd fired after 19 years, had turned their betrayal into a reckoning. By Friday, the board had caved, offering him a new role as Chief Information Security Officer with unprecedented power. As Ethan stood in their polished boardroom, his terms accepted, he felt no triumph, only resolve. The fight wasn't over. It was evolving, and so was he. 6 months later, Ethan sat in his corner office on the 12th floor, the Charlotte skyline framed by floor-to-ceiling windows. His aloe plant, a survivor of his old cubicle, thrived on the sill. Below, the IT department hummed under his leadership, a team he'd reshaped with quiet authority. He'd promoted Alex, the 26-year-old coder he'd mentored, to oversee daily operations. Alex had the spark Ethan saw in himself decades ago. Hungry, meticulous, eager to learn. "You're giving me too much rope," Alex teased once. but Ethan trusted him to rise, just as he'd trusted himself to strike back. The fallout from Ethan's report was seismic. Greg Harper, cornered by forensic accountants, pled guilty to fraud and embezzlement, his deal shaving years off a decade-long sentence. Ryan Mitchell, still proclaiming innocence, faced trial, his emails a noose of evidence. Nathan Brooks, tracked down in a Miami condo, was extradited, his consulting facade crumbling under scrutiny. Pinnacle recovered $4,900,000 0 cents of the $5,300,000 0 cents stolen, enough to stabilize the company. The board, chastened, leaned on Ethan's audits, his veto power a firewall against future greed. His name, once invisible, was now whispered with respect in the halls. But respect wasn't Ethan's goal, justice was, and something deeper, rebuilding what betrayal had broken. He'd walked back into Pinnacle not for glory, but to fix a system that had failed him, to ensure no one else was discarded as he'd been. He rewrote security protocols, mandated transparency for vendor contracts, and trained his team to question, not obey. Alex, now leading projects Ethan once shouldered, called it the Caldwell Doctrine. No blind spots, no unchecked power. Ethan just called it doing the job right. The personal toll lingered. Late nights in his study, combing data while Laura slept, had left shadows under his eyes. The anger that fueled his counterstrike had faded, replaced by a quiet satisfaction, but also questions. Could he stay in a place that had cast him out? Did he want to? Laura, his anchor through 21 years, saw the conflict. One evening, as they sat on their porch, the Charlotte air thick with summer, she took his hand. "You've won, Ethan, but are you done?" He didn't answer right away, his gaze on the fireflies blinking in their yard. "I don't know," he admitted. "I fixed what they broke, but it's still their house." "Then build your own," she said, her voice soft but firm. "You've got the tools." Laura's words stuck. Ethan began mentoring beyond Pinnacle, speaking at local tech meetups, sharing his story, not the fraud, but the grit of surviving obsolescence. He taught free coding workshops at a community center, watching kids like his son Connor light up as they debugged their first scripts. One night, a 15-year-old named Mia, all braces and ambition, handed him a USB drive. "My game," she said shyly. "You say to back everything up." Ethan laughed, the sound rare and warm. He saw himself in her, and in Alex, proof his work rippled beyond Pinnacle's walls. The board noticed, at a quarterly meeting, Robert Langston, the CPA who'd carried Ethan's report to victory, pulled him aside. "You're changing the culture, Ethan, not just here, out there. We're getting calls from competitors asking how we locked you down." "Didn't lock me," Ethan said, half smiling. "I chose to stay." "For now," Robert said, his eyes sharp. "You've got options, don't forget that." Ethan did have options. Headhunters circled, offering CTO roles at startups, six-figure bonuses dangling. He ignored them, not out of loyalty to Pinnacle, but because he wasn't chasing titles. He was chasing meaning, something Pinnacle's betrayal had nearly stolen. He found it in small moments. Alex nailing a system upgrade, Mia's game running smoothly, Laura's proud smile when he came home early for once. The true closure came at a family dinner hosted at their Dilworth home. Connor, home from med school, grilled steaks while Laura set the table. Alex and his girlfriend, Jenna, joined, along with Sarah from accounting, who'd stood up for Ethan the day he was fired. The backyard glowed with string lights, laughter filling the air. Connor raised a glass, his grin wide. "To Dad, the guy who took down a corporate conspiracy and still makes time for my bad pre-med jokes." Ethan chuckled, but his eyes drifted to Laura, who squeezed his knee under the table. Sarah leaned in, her voice low. "You know the team calls you the ghost now, right? The guy who sees everything, strikes from the shadows." "Sounds cooler than I am," Ethan said, but the nickname stuck, a nod to the quiet power he'd wielded. Later, as guests mingled, Ethan stepped into the yard, the city's hume faint beyond the trees. His phone buzzed. A text from Robert. "Board approved your new security framework. Unanimous. You're untouchable. Ethan pocketed the phone, the words settling like a final puzzle piece. He'd rebuilt Pinnacle's trust, not by shouting, but by proving what loyalty and vigilance could do. Laura joined him, her arm slipping through his. "Happy?" she asked, echoing her question from months ago. Ethan considered it, the weight of 19 years, betrayal, revenge, redemption, falling away. "Not happy," he said, his voice steady. "Whole." "That's better." She smiled, resting her head on his shoulder. "You built a hell of a bridge, Ethan." He nodded, thinking of the bridges he'd burned and the ones he'd forged. Pinnacle had tried to erase him, but he'd rewritten their story, line by line, backup by backup. Greg, Ryan, and Nathan were gone, their greed a cautionary tale. Ethan remained, not just a survivor but a cornerstone. His team respected him, his family saw him, and the city beyond was starting to. As Connor's laughter rang out, Alex clinking glasses with Sarah, Ethan felt the past loosen its grip. The ghost had struck, then stepped into the light. He wasn't just fixing systems anymore. He was building legacies, ones that wouldn't crumble. And in that moment, under the Charlotte stars, Ethan Caldwell knew he'd done more than win. He'd come home.